Another week of hockey action in the books, and some NHL teams at the bottom of the standing had some pretty big runs of late. So how has that affected our tier list? Let's find out, and we'll start as always at the bottom with the Perpetual Darkness tier. Now only 3 teams. That's right, I'm sorry Blackhawks, Sharks, and Blue Jackets fans, but you are alone at the bottom. While some of your brethren have crawled out and seen the light, you are still stuck down here among the worst teams in the NHL, but you're still at least not the Nashville Predators, who yes, are a tier above you in the pathetic tier. Now, Nashville did have a pretty decent week last week. They went 2-1 with wins over Vancouver and Calgary, but it's too little too late for them. They're 7 games under 500, and I anticipate they're going to be sellers at the deadline. One tier from them, we have the bad teams, which includes 2 surging squads, the Red Wings, Canadiens, Ducks, Flyers, and Sabres. The Red Wings had a pretty good week last week. They went 3-0, scoring at least 4 goals in all 3 of their wins, and it wasn't the most difficult of schedules facing Pittsburgh and Columbus, but they did beat up on Winnipeg, and Detroit is now just 1 game under 500. They're right in the thick of a very tight playoff race in the East. And the other team that had a really good week is the Anaheim Ducks. And while Anaheim didn't have quite as good of a record as Detroit did last week, going 3-1, they had a much tougher gauntlet of opponents to face. They beat New Jersey, Winnipeg, and Tampa Bay. Their only loss coming against the Edmonton Oilers by 1 goal. Like Detroit, they're 1 game under 500, and although unfortunately the West is not quite as open up as far as the wildcard standings goes as the East is, it's very encouraging to see that the Anaheim Ducks are going on a little bit of a tear here. They're having a pretty strong start to the 2025 year. One tier up from them, we have the Calgary Flames, kind of starting to sputter a little bit. Last week they went 1-2. They beat Vancouver but lost winnable games to Utah and Nashville. They're still over 500 and they're still in a playoff position, but again, I'm not quite bought in that the Calgary Flames are going to be able to sustain their success down the road, especially when they're going to have to play those teams like Winnipeg, Vancouver, and Edmonton down the stretch. I think this is going to be very tough for Calgary. Next tier up, we have the New York Rangers, who started the 2025 year with actually a pretty good run. They went 2-1 last week, a good quality win close against Boston and taking care of business in Chicago, but they also lost handily to their division rival Capitals. The Rangers right now just treading water. They're still 2 games under 500. Igor Shesterkin obviously out with the injury right now. That couldn't have come at a worse time for the Rags. Just a lot of turmoil in New York, and like I said, the East is becoming a much more condensed conference than the West is, which means there are going to be fewer easy teams for the Rags to beat up on down the stretch. Moving up to the next tier, I called them mid but boring. Now I'm just going to call them below average. We have the Islanders, Penguins, and the Seattle Kraken. 3 teams that are just kind of there. I know everybody's making a big deal out of the Penguins shooting up the Eastern Conference and having a good little run. But then last week, 3 losses to Detroit, Florida, and Carolina. On the road, yes, and 2 of them were in overtime / the shootout, so they are getting points at least. But again, like I said, the East is so tight. Pittsburgh, you're going to have to start racking up some wins if you want to make some noise in the East right now. Up above them in the mid-tier, we have the Canucks, Blues, Utah Hockey Club, and Boston Bruins, who had a very rough week. 0-3-1, their losses coming against, again, beatable opponents like the Rangers and Islanders in overtime. But they also lost to the Leafs and the Caps, 2 of the top teams in the Eastern Conference, so that's at least acceptable. There's still 3 games over 500. They're right in the thick of things in that 3rd spot in the Atlantic Division, but the gap between them and not being in a wildcard spot is just 4 points. Boston's got to ratchet it up now. Above them are my darlings, the Senators, who I'm urging to just keep swimming. I know that they're not in the wildcard spot right now by points, but if it was determined by point percentage, they would be in the last wildcard spot, so the Senators are in a pretty decent position. Last week, they only played 2 games, but they were both losses. Luckily, they were to Western Conference teams in Dallas and St. Louis and on the road, but this week, they are facing a bunch of teams in the Eastern Conference, Detroit, Buffalo, and Pittsburgh, who they need to be able to beat if they want to hold on to that wildcard spot. Next up, we have a big grouping in the Contenders tier, the biggest tier by far. It includes the Tampa Bay Lightning, LA Kings, Minnesota Wild, Winnipeg Jets, New Jersey Devils, Carolina Hurricanes, Washington Capitals, Florida Panthers, and Dallas Stars. There are 2 teams in this tier who had really bad weeks, starting with the Tampa Bay Lightning. 3 games last week against 3 West Coast teams, 2 of them eminently beatable in the Sharks and Ducks. 3 losses, not a good look for the Tampa Bay Lightning. They also only scored 1 goal in each of those 3 games, so they really need to find some offensive firepower once again and hope that that was just a bad West Coast trip. On the Devils side though, it gets even worse. The exact same schedule against Anaheim, Los Angeles, and San Jose on the road, lost all 3 of them. They did manage to recover with a win over Seattle, which might make you wonder how that's possible for them to be worse than the Tampa Bay Lightning when they did literally the same thing. And the reason is that the Devils are supposed to be the better team, and for them to only score 7 goals in 4 4 game. They were the best team in the East and one of the best teams in the NHL in my estimation last week. That is a bigger drop than the Tampa Bay Lightning, who I thought were very talented, but were not near the caliber of team the Devils were. That then leaves us with the new best teams in the NHL, the 4 top teams: the Colorado Avalanche, Toronto Maple Leafs, Vegas Golden Knights, and the best team in my estimation, the Edmonton Oilers. They're not at the top of the standings, but they've been one of the hottest teams in the NHL after that disastrous first month, and they are unquestionably the most talented team in the league. The Toronto Maple Leafs had a good week for themselves. All 4 teams they played were very beatable in the Islanders twice, Bruins, and Flyers, but they took care of business. Getting 8 points in 4 games is never going to hurt you, which is why they are among the best teams in the NHL this week.